Unlike my colleague here, I do want to reflect on the judgment of the Supreme Court. I read the Supreme Court judgment. It was very well written. It was a very well written act of sophistry. First of all, just on my history, I had 2 controversial prorogations. The second shouldn't have been because it was routine. The first one, I prorogued, I think, for slightly longer than Boris Johnson had proposed. It was 5 to 6 weeks. It was to give the opposition an opportunity to reflect on a course of action they were going to take that was unquestionably would do serious short and long-term damage to the Canadian Federation. Not only did they get the feedback from the Canadian public on that, as a consequence, they replaced the leader who had taken them down that course of action. So prorogation is a tool for limited purposes, but it is unquestionably a prerogative of the Prime Minister to advise the Queen on short-term, essentially a short-term action with Parliament, and unquestionably the prerogative of the Queen to grant it. And all I can tell you from our own experience is you have got to nip in the bud before it gets bad judges deciding that they are not there to adjudicate the law but to invent it themselves. This is a very dangerous precedent, and since your court is new, I urge you to do something about this before it goes much farther. On the question of executive power, can executive power be used, and should it be used, to deal with a parliament that effectively doesn't seem to be able to act? And I think the answer to that is no. The answer to this situation is to restore the proper constitutional functioning of the British parliamentary system, which is that if a government, if a House of Commons is unwilling to support the core legislation of the government, it has a responsibility to replace that government and or go to a general election. This notion that you can pass legislation to try to put in law what the Prime Minister's political opinion should be, and if he doesn't do it, hold him legally accountable but not remove him from office, is a ridiculous position. This is just inherently dysfunctional in our system. The British system, which we have largely adopted in Canada, grafted with American federalism, the British system was developed over centuries, and these for reasons that have proven to be effective and good over time. And this deviation is it's just terrible, and it has to be fixed. It cannot be fixed by executive override, but the legislation that put this into effect needs to be repealed, and repealed quickly. Just on the question of the trade deal, why is it so difficult? Why has it been so difficult? Look, in Canada, we had 2 years of pre-study, 7 years of negotiations, and 3 years of implementation to get a trade deal with the European Union. So these things are not easy. This one shouldn't be as complicated because essentially you already have a free trade framework with the European Union, which frankly Brexiteers are not proposing to change significantly. So it shouldn't take as long. I don't think, from what I'm hearing, it's the fault of the bureaucrats. I think it's the fault of the political dynamics. Europe doesn't want Britain to leave. And as long as there are people in this country who say we can only leave if the EU gets a veto via a deal, then of course you can't get it done, or you can't get a reasonable deal. So the problem here has been people who not only don't accept the referendum result, but have consistently tried to undermine Britain's negotiating position going forward. And by the way, power to your Prime Minister calling this Act of Parliament the Surrender Act. It's exactly what it is. And when I'll tell you something. I used to tell my staff when my opposition was complaining about some term I was using, double the ad buy. It means it's hurting, it's true, and it's hurting, and you need to make them hurt more till they back off. Final thing just on Europe quickly. I don't know what the future of Europe is. Look, there's been a lot of bashing of the European Union here. I think we should step back and also recognize that much of what the European Union has accomplished since the Second World War is remarkable. You know, you had a continent that had led the world progressively into ever-expanding global conflicts, and you have created, in Europe, has been created since the Second World War, an unparalleled degree of social and political harmony, and much of it has been good. I do think that the Brexit debate and the challenges it's caused in the United Kingdom has diverted a lot of EU attention from the reforms they are going to have to undertake to make the EU viable and successful over the next few decades, because it has significant structural problems of its own, and those should be addressed.
Leo. Just to very quickly amplify the